Hello Internet, welcome to Daily Codes again. We are in our fourth video onto this project where we want to scrape data periodically from websites and save that data into a database through an API, then use that data onto a dashboard through Plotly Dash. So today we are going to write code that will help us to fetch data from websites. So when it comes to web scraping, I usually split the tasks into two. The first task is to fetch the data itself, even if it is a CSV or a HTML or MP4s or MP3 or whatever we are trying to fetch from the web. We first fetch the data and store it in a temporary location. In our case here, the temporary location we are going to be storing data is the temp folder or TMP folder that we created in the previous videos. If this is your first video, there are other previous videos where I showed you what we are going to be doing. Then there was a video where we set up the whole of this structure. Then there is a video where we set up Airflow, which is our previous video. You will find the link in the description. Now in this video, we are going to write code that will help us to fetch the HTML files and store them in the temp folder. Then in the next video, we are going to use Beautiful Soup to scrape them. But before then, today, let us fetch the data. So we are going to write this code that will help us to fetch the data. Then we are going to put that code in Airflow so that we can try it out and see if when we run a task in Apache Airflow, we will see results. So we are going to start with creating libraries or a base class that will help us to fetch data. So remember, we have a folder created here for library. So I'll be putting all base classes here. The base class in this case would be a base class that will help us to fetch any any data from the website, HTML files most likely, from any website. So in case maybe you want to expand this project to fetch other HTML files, you'll have a base class that you'll be using so that you don't repeat yourselves. So let's create a file called fetchdata.py. So a new file here. I'm going to call it fetchdata.py. So inside fetchdata.py, we are only going to use the special library we're going to use here is OS and requests. So let me import those libraries. So import requests, then import OS, then we are going to set the environment of OS, the proxy variable in that environment to be all, so that it can be working on our system, and also it can be working in Airflow. So we find that if you don't put this, then it may not work in Airflow. So I'm going to have os.environ, and I'm going to say no proxy should be all. No proxy. And I'm going to assign it to all, that is star. So let's create our base class. This class is going to be called fetchdata. it's not going to inherit from anything. So when you look at the convention, the way I do my naming of the files, you'll find that each file contains only one class, and the name of the class is related to the name of the file, but the file is all underscore, is all lowercase, I mean, and the words are separated by underscore. Then the name of the class is camel case, and the first letter is also uppercase. So this is PEP8 way of coding. So let's have our constructor. And the dependencies of this class will be, the arguments, I mean, the arguments will be URL, and the type of the URL is a string. So in this class, we are going to be passing URL because what we want to do is to fetch the HTML file from the web. So whenever you instantiate this class, whenever you create this object, you'll need to pass in the URL. Then we will need to save that file somewhere on the disk. And in this case, we're going to be saving it in TMP folder or the temp folder. We will need to give it a name. So we're going to pass in here, file name. So self dot, this is the first variable. I will call it web link. Should be the URL. Then self dot file name is going to be the file name. So we need to put in some conditions here to make sure that the user of this class passes the URL. So we're going to have if not URL, if someone does not pass URL or passes URL as none, then we're going to raise an exception, and the exception should say you have not provided a URL to pass or to fetch the data. So raise exception, and it should say this: you have not provided a URL to fetch data. I'm just confirming here if I'm recording and it's clear on your side. Yep, things seems to be clear on your screen. And because I care about you and how code is shown on your screen, you should subscribe. If you're not subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. So let's continue. If the URL is not a string, if someone gives us something that is maybe an integer or a float, then we should also raise an exception. We don't want problems. Also with the base classes should be written the best way possible. So if not, so the instance of the URL should be a string. So is instance, then URL should be string. So if it is not a string, we should also raise an error, raise an exception, I mean. And this error is value error, and the message inside the value error, we're going to say the type of the URL should be a string. The type of the URL should be a string. Yeah, you can also pass in what someone has provided. Let's make it longer. So let me call this message. Message should be, let me move this. There, the type of URL should be a string, but you passed URL of type so we're going to put here type, and the type is self.url. No, let's just use URL. Then this should be an F string. So when we look here, this is how it's going to look like. If it is not a URL, then the type of the URL should be a string, but you have passed that. So that is how our constructor will look like. Then what we are going to pass here is message. So far we have just defined how fetch data should look like, but now let's define how it's going to behave. So let's pass let's create the first method, and the first method is fetch. Fetch is part of this class, so we pass in self. Then we want to fetch the data, so we're going to say HTML data. So this variable here is going to be request, so we're going to use the requests package. Did I import it? Yes, I imported it. So the request package, and we say request.get, and what do we want to get? We need to pass in the URL, so we get self.weblink, that is the URL. So when we get that, we need to only get the content, because the content is the HTML data. Then what we are going to return is HTML data. Then we're going to define run. So you can also see that each function is doing one specific thing. We don't want a function to do a lot of things, and each class is doing one specific thing. That will help you when you're scaling your program. So let's define run. So the run function, it will be only running the class, which is part of the class. So our data will be equal to the fetch data function, so self dot fetch, then we are going to, after fetching the data, we're going to save the data somewhere in the folder in the project, and I say that we're going to save it inside the temp folder. So let's save it there. So let's use a context manager with, so open the context manager I'm using is open, and we're going to open a file. I'm using F string here. It's covering your screen, and I want to be in the folder tmp slash. The F string will allow me to pass in a variable, so the file name, so self.filename, and then the file name should end with HTML, so .html, and we want to write. So I'm going to be writing binaries. So I'm going to write binaries. So I'm going to open this as file. Then I'm doing file.write to write the binaries. And what I'm going to write is the data that we got here. Then I need to close it. So file dot close after writing. So this will help us to fetch any HTML file. Provided you have the URL, you only need to create the, an object from this class with the URL and the file name, and it will always save that HTML here. So we can try that here. When we run this file, let's have a trial here. So if name equals to main, so we're going to say fetch data, and we pass in the URL. I have the URL somewhere here. So this is the URL, and it is going to globalpetrolprices.com, and I'm still asking the owners of globalpetrolprices.com to allow me use their site for education purposes. I'm not saving any of their data on my system. After I have finished these video tutorials, everything will be deleted. Then the name of the file, I'm going to call it test file. So it's going to be testfile.html when we run this. So after this, when we instantiate this, I can just call it fetch object. But this is making this too long, so instead of doing this, I can just do this. Then I say dot. I just call the method dot run, and this will just run that class. So let's run this file. Let me open the terminal and I try to run it. So here we have the terminal. Let me make this bigger because I know you are going to subscribe when you see everything I'm doing. Then I'm going to say, so in this terminal, I have the virtual environment activated. The way we set up this virtual environment in the second video in this series, if this is your first video to watch, you can check how we set up the virtual environment so that you know the packages we install. But in this case, I doubt if we need to install any package because Python comes with requests and OSO is okay. So we're going to run Python. Then this fetch data.py is inside libraries, so I should say libraries, then fetch data.py. Then I run this. It is not giving us any output, but when we now look into this folder here, we can see that this file is created here. It's called testfile.html. So this means that we can use this piece of code to fetch data from anywhere. All we need to do is to just call this class and give it the URL to any website, and it will bring us the HTML file. We shall save that HTML file here. So the first thing I want to fetch is fuel, and I want to fetch fuel from country's fuel. Remember, at the beginning of this project, we said that we want to fetch fuel prices for Kenya and Uganda. So I am going to write code or classes that will help us to fetch fuel. So remember, we already have the base class for fetch, so we shall just use the base class and fetch fuel for a particular country. So inside fetch, we are going to create a new file, and this file we're going to call it fuel.py. So anything inside fetch is for fetching. So inside there, we need to use the base class. So we're going to say from libraries dot fetch data, import that class, the base class, import fetch data. So we're going to define the class fuel, and in the constructor of fuel, we are going to ask the user of the class fuel to pass in the country. So we don't want to write code for fetching fuel for Kenya, then write code for fetching fuel for Uganda. We just want to write code for fetching fuel. So we're going to define the constructor. I like the way VS Code does this for me, but by now I'm not using typing. Typing is good, should be using it. Don't follow my advice for not using it. So country should be country, but we don't have variable here, so we need to define it. So there's something called copy paste. Oh, then I'm using typing. World is funny. Don't use this, then I use it. So let's define the behavior for this class. So fetch fuel. Fetch fuel belongs to this class. So the URL that we're going to use, I showed you the site. I have the URL somewhere. I'm just going to copy, but we need to use an F string for it. Let me copy the URL, then I explain it to you. I don't want to type the whole of it. That's the URL. Hallelujah. Control Z, Control copy. We learned this long time ago. Control paste, Control V. Yeah, so what's happening here? What I've got, it's an F string. F strings help us to inject variables in the string. So now I know that when I type this into a browser and I put a country name here, it will give me the gasoline prices for that country. Then after that, we're going now to use this class here to fetch our data. So I'm going to have this fetch data. The URL is the URL. Is URL. Then the file name, I want the file name to be related to the country. So I'm going to say file name instead of just passing file name, I'm going to have an F string. Then the first thing should be the country name, so self dot country, but it is a string, so I want it to be lower dot lower, so in lowercase, so it will be country, but this is just country. I need to prefix it with fuel prices, fuel price. But we know that this is a HTML. When we call this, we already wrote it here, and we are passing to it the file name. Then when we come here, you will see the file name will be used, then it will be suffixed with the .html. So we don't need to pass .html here. Then we do .run. So this will help us to fetch the fuel prices for any country that we pass here. We can try this out with the countries, Kenya and Uganda mostly. So if name equals to main, then we are going to say fuel, then we pass the country is Kenya, dot fetch fuel. We can also try with the other country, so I'll just copy this, then paste it, and here's Uganda. Then let's run fuel.py, and it will run this part, and we see what will happen. So Python, so fuel.py is in fetch, then fuel.py. Run that. No module named libraries because we need to specify where Python path is. So Python path will be equal to pwd. So let's run that again. It is, yep. So what do we expect? We expect Kenya. So we expect Kenya fuel price.html and Uganda fuel price.html. So let's look at temp folder. We have them, Kenya fuel price.html and Uganda fuel price.html. So now we can be able to fetch fuel. The next thing, because what we want to do is to see if we can live in any of these countries. Fuel price determines a lot how much, what is the cost of living. It's kind of has correlation. You know, correlation is not causation. So fuel may or may not be causing it, but it has correlation onto with the prices of other things. Then to live in a place, you need to know the weather conditions. So we are also going to fetch weather for both Kenya and Uganda. You can pause this video and try to write code inside fetch folder using the library fetch data to fetch to fetch weather from any website that provides weather. I have a URL, but now let's try to write that. This time around I will try to be fast, because you've seen what I've done here, and I think it can be what I'm going to do is the same thing. So let me I'm going to do it first anyway. So fetch weather dot py, and then we are importing the same things. We're importing this. Then our class weather. Then the constructor for weather, we define I'm not using these ones for now. I need to pass in. So for weather, the site that I'm using does not require the country, it just requires the city. So I'm going to pass in city. Then self.city should be our city. The type for city should be a string. You can also put the other checks that we put in the base class. Then let's define fetch weather. Self. And the URL, I have the URL on my side here. It takes the same explanation as the one for fetching fuel. Then we're going to use fetch data with this URL, that is URL should be URL. Then file name should be an F string. Then we're going to inject here the city name, so self.city. Then underscore weather, then dot run. So it becomes easier just reusing the classes that you created before. So we can try this out also, and we see if it will work. So if name equals to main, weather. So weather needs city. We are going to use Kampala. Dot fetch data. Dot fetch weather, I mean. Then we're going to use Nairobi weather. Nairobi dot fetch weather. Then we're going to run weather.py. The same, instead of using fuel.py, we do weather.py. Then we hopefully we will see Nairobi weather.html and Kampala weather.html. So we have these temporary files. So now we have created code, or we have written code that will allow us to fetch weather and fuel prices for both Kenya and Uganda. But now we want this code to run periodically. That is where Airflow will come into play. So we are going to create an Airflow DAG, but before then you can have P break. Okay, Now, after visiting the toilet, we can now continue. So we remember yesterday we created this airflow and we tried it out and we saw that it was working, but it didn't have DAGs. Today we are going to create a DAG that will be running after every 4 hours, and it should be helping us to fetch weather and fetch fuel prices for both countries after every 4 hours. So I'm going to create a file here inside DAG, and I call it 4 hourly DAG. Instead of 4 hourly, let me make it hourly, because fuel prices change every hour. And so hourly DAG dot py. The name of the file does not matter a lot, because in the config here we said that this DAG folder says that any py file inside the DAGs is expected to be having a definition of a DAG inside. So the name of this does not matter a lot. So let's open it, and we are going to import DAG class. So from airflow, import DAG. Then I'm also going to use date time. So from date time, import date time, import date time. Then I'm going to import the fetch files. So the fetch classes. From fetch dot fuel, import fuel, because this is the task that we want to be running after every hour. We want to fetch that HTML file. Then from fetch weather, from fetch dot weather, import that class weather. Then let's define our DAG. So DAG, I don't know if I need to explain to you what a DAG is, but a DAG is a directed acyclic graph. Let me first define it, then I explain to you. Hopefully this video will not be too long for you to follow. So DAG ID is going to be run hourly tasks DAG. Need to separate this with a comma. Then when should it start? Should start today. Start date should be today. Today is 27th of October 2020. So date time, that's why I imported it. 2022 is the year. The month is October, and today is 27th. Then the schedule interval interval should be hourly. So there is a way of making it hourly without writing cron hourly, like that. So DAG is not imported from Airflow. Import DAG. I did not import DAG. Also, I need to write the tasks that we have here. These two are written in Python, so I'm going to use Python operator. So from Airflow dot operators dot Python import Python operator. So I'm going to explain what a DAG is theoretically at the end of this video. So just stay tuned. Let's create the DAG and create the tasks, and we test them. When they are okay, then I will explain what they are. So now let's create our tasks. Our first task is to fetch Kenyan fuel. Then the second task will be to fetch Ugandan fuel, then fetch Kenya weather, fetch Ugandan weather. So it is just like one fetch function that is repeated several times. So the first task is run fetch Kenyan fuel. Fuel. But it is a Python operator. I'm using Python operator because the code is in function. You'd use bash operator if the code is in bash. We have to specify the DAG. So our DAG is DAG. Then we need to give it a task ID. It should be the name of the task, and it should be unique. That's why it is an ID. Then the function that we are calling is the Python callable. Should be the function that we are calling. In the first case, when we are fetching fuel, should be fuel. Remember when we were defining fuel, when we go back here, fuel, we give it a country, then we do fetch fuel. So fuel, is it? Where's our DAG? DAG is here. We are looking at Kenya, so fuel Kenya, then dot fetch fuel. So that is one task that is defined, and when we run Airflow, this task will be running every hour. So let's copy this and we paste it down here. So now we want Ugandan. So it becomes simple if you're using object-oriented programming, because you only define things, then you just reuse them. So this is Ugandan, and here we shall put Uganda. So these are now two tasks, and they can run independently at the same time. Then we need to fetch Kenyan weather. So let me just use what is already in the clipboard. Oh, my bad. Copy. Paste. So fetch Kenyan weather. Python callable, DAG. So this is fetch Kenyan weather. Then here we're going to have weather, and instead of passing in the country, we pass in the city. So Nairobi. I know I am not right when I assume that the weather of Nairobi is the weather of Kenya, but we want to stay in Nairobi if that was the case. But if it was not the case and you wanted to stay somewhere else, maybe in Nakuru or Mombasa, then you pass in Mombasa. Okay, so whether that, I'm just wondering why this is also not fetch fuel, it should be fetch dot fetch weather. The same for Uganda. I know most of you have already skipped this because it's now repetitive. So Ugandan, here will be Ugandan, then this will be Kampala, because we want to stay in Kampala. But if you want to stay in another town, maybe Mbarara or Tororo, then you can put the city that you want. So this, we expect this to help us to fetch the data. All of them should run at the same time. So I have not yet put, I have not put the dependency of what should run first and what should run second. When we write code for scraping these HTML files from the temp folder, and then we put that code inside this DAG, then we shall put a dependency where run fetch fuel, fetch Ugandan fuel should run first, then scrapping Ugandan fuel should run after it. But now all of them can run at the same time. So let us, first of all, I'm going to delete these files so that when we run this code in Airflow, we can see what is happening. The files will be created here in the temp folder. So remember, yesterday we said that if you want to run Airflow, you need to have 2 terminals. So I'm going to launch another terminal. I'm going to deactivate that conda. This is not part of the tutorial. Should be conda deactivate. Okay, clear that. So let's activate the environment we created. Then we are going to export Python path. Should be, you know that if you don't do this, then it will be saying that it is not seeing libraries. For example, here it will tell you that cannot find fetch library. But when you do this, you'll find it. Then Airflow home. Should be where we are, pwd / Airflow. The same in the other terminal. Clear. So I can echo just to confirm $Python path is that, then echo $Airflow home is that. The same also in this terminal, in the other terminal. This echo Python path is that, and Airflow home is this. So we are fine, we are good to go. So I'm going to run Airflow. scheduler, but I need to make sure that my Postgres database, remember we connected Airflow to work with Postgres database. I need to make sure that it is working and running. So I'm just going to launch pgadmin in a second. Okay, so it has launched. So I'm going to run Airflow scheduler. Then, since it is now running, I'm going to launch Airflow web server. It's giving us lots of warning. Yeah, it's running here. Yesterday I told you that warnings don't worry us until they become errors. So let me go to a browser and I go here. Yep, so we have run hourly tasks. DAG is here already. It is not active, it is inactive, but we can open it and we see here we already have, run hourly tasks DAG. This is a DAG, and then these are the tasks here already. So what we're going to do is to activate this DAG. When we activate it, remember here we defined that it should start on 27, and now is at 10:30 in the evening, 10:30 p.m. It will start at in the morning of 27. So there are so many tasks that will be running here. So let me just turn on the DAG and you see. Hopefully nothing will fail. And the good thing is that when something fails and you have organized your web scraping project like this, where the first thing is to fetch, then the second thing is to scrape, you'll know where to debug than having everything in the same place. Let me refresh this. So you see, the first tasks have passed. So this is the tasks at midnight, this is at 1, and as they are running, we are going to be looking at the temp folder. These are created. Remember, they have the same name, so it will be overwriting some of them, but it has created this. When it runs again, it's going to be overwriting. We are going to write a routine that will help us to delete files from the temp folder after we have scraped it. But for today, this is enough for you. You can continue creating other files, maybe fetching something else from some other country, from some other website, and the data should be going here in the temp folder if you followed properly. Until tomorrow. So tomorrow what we're going to be doing is to write a routine that will help us to scrape this data and post it to an API. We are not going to create the API tomorrow, but we're just going to be scraping the data tomorrow. So until tomorrow, what you've learned, please share with someone if it is at work or at home, and not at home if it is at school or at work. Share, or you can share this video and teach someone else. When you teach is when you learn better. Learn something, teach someone. Bye. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Oh, I had forgotten. I said that I'm going to show you what DAG is. So it is not yet a bye. So a DAG, according to graph theory, so in graph theory, there is graphs. I'm going to search for it here. Graph. What is a graph? Graph. Network science. You can skip this if you understand what that is. It's not necessary. So a graph is a connection of nodes and edges. So when you click on these images, when you'll see clearly. So we have edges here and we have nodes here. So a graph is just a connection of nodes and edges. For example, a good graph is like a road network where the nodes are the centers and then the road themselves are the edges. So what we are seeing here as a DAG is a directed acyclic graph. So we know what a graph is. A graph is just a connection of nodes and edges. In our case, in what we have been coding here, the nodes are the tasks and the edges is the relationship between two tasks. And the relationships we have here is which task will run before which task, or which task will run after which task. That is the edge. So it is directed in a way that the graph, the relationship is one way. For example, if it is a road, the road should be one way. It should not be going and then coming back on the road. And this way is the relationship between two tasks should be one way, in a way that this task one, should run before the other task. So task one, the edge should be pointing from task one to task two. Then it is acyclic. Acyclic meaning that you will never come to a task to run it again when you have already run it. So that is a DAG, directed acyclic graph. You can read more about graph theory and you will understand much more about directed acyclic graphs. Yeah, so until tomorrow, have a great time and teach someone. Bye.